Hey, we're live here today with Figment Networks and Oasis to talk about all things privacy, all things DeFi, and to hear about how Oasis is planning to build a platform for scalable and private DeFi. Today, we have two different groups here, Figment Networks and the team from Oasis. On Figment side, myself, Andrew, I focus on all things product at Figment, and Lorien, who is our CEO. And then I'll let the two folks from Oasis introduce themselves if you guys would like to take it away now.
Luca, you want to go?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here. My name is Luca, and I lead DeFi at Oasis. I joined this company 2 years ago. My background has always been in product and indigenous functions, was working at Google, American Express, and Procter & Gamble. So I definitely transitioned from more centralized and owned world to the more decentralized or like digital money, which is something I like way more. Happy to tell you why, in case anyone is interested.
Yeah. So hello, folks. Thank you so much for the invite. I'm Vishwa. So I work as a privacy architect. So it's a cross-functional role where I focus mostly on looking at how we can use subsets of our technology to satisfy the interesting industrial use cases or developer use cases.
Okay, great. So where I wanted to start today was to really think about, as we approach mainnet, let's take two groups of people and how they might start interacting and what they might be able to do. So those two groups of people are maybe the people who own and stake the token, and then maybe the developers who are building apps. And so how it relates to DeFi, how do you think that people who are staking or have the Rose token would use that token, or what they could do for DeFi in the sort of after mainnet launch?
Yeah, so one of the things that I could probably touch upon is the timelines that we're looking at here. And then maybe Luca, after that, we can talk about the way in which we plan to enable DeFi. So we are working towards our mainnet. In fact, the Genesis block was generated and given out to the validators so that they can take a look at it. This was last week. So we are hoping that by the end of the month, we will have a mainnet beta, which will not have transfers enabled. And we're going to wait for a few more weeks so that we can, this is for a precautionary security measure. So subsequent to that, we will let the community vote on when we can have full decentralization, so enabling transfers. So that is the timeline that we're looking at. So which means over the next few weeks, we expect that we will have first mainnet data, and then that will move towards a fully decentralized network. And then as far as developers are concerned, we are expecting to have two different paradigms. So if you know the way in which the Oasis architecture works, we have a consensus layer, and then we have these parallel runtimes, which we call paradigms. So one of the paradigms is going to be run by Oasis Labs, and that provides support for ecosystems of data providers, data consumers. So we are expecting that to be an API level access that developers can engage with. And then we also have a separate paradigm that is coming from Second State, which is going to be an Ethereum compatible paradigm. So that would enable moving of applications, Ethereum applications, to the Oasis platform. So those are the things that are coming up within the next few weeks.
Okay. And in terms of developers and sort of that sort of Ethereum compatibility, Luca, do you imagine that we'll see some existing applications from Ethereum brought over wholesale, like the logic of the smart contract will be copied into Oasis, or just the asset will be moved over? Or how do you think developers will start interacting with Oasis?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So at its core, we bring something that I think is pretty unique in the blockchain space, which is this ability of executing smart contracts that keep the data private and confidential, which, as a reminder, is very different from saying private transactions and just private blockchain. I think it's a very fundamental difference. With our technology and with core network that we built, developers are able to separate public and private information the way they think is applicable for that specific application that they're building. So depending on the use case, they have this ability of separating the two instead of being private by default or public by default, which is a very important distinction from other chains. The second very important distinction that I love to make is that privacy means very different things for different people, and also scalability means very different things for different people. Executing X transaction that are like sending money from wallet A to wallet B is very different from executing a machine learning or deep learning model on that specific chain. So one thing that we should say is that we really care about enabling this ability of executing functions that keep the data of the smart contract private and confidential, while enabling this computation of more complex transaction and more complex computation. So This answer, which is sort of like the core layer of our network, implicitly explains why we think that developers would be very well placed to actually build applications on top of us. Now, in the current generation of DeFi, it's really focused on yield farming and these like stacking incentives on top of each other. And there are applications where privacy is extremely important. And one of the things that I really do is like I constantly talk to existing projects or projects that are about to launch and try to get a sense of where do they see privacy, like if privacy makes sense for them and why they think that privacy will actually play a role. And it's very interesting because probably 95% of the protocols that I talk to tell me that they expect privacy to be one or probably the most important thing of the next wave of applications on Ethereum. The first one being liquidity and clearly usage, because without that, there's not going to be any follow-up conversation.
Okay, that makes sense. And so when I've been following the Oasis project for a while, I hadn't really thought about DeFi until you guys started describing more about it. Were there certain things that happened where you realized, hey, what we've built is actually really applicable for developers or for users of DeFi? Or would you just say this is more of an emergent use case, that why you've realized you're now in a good spot to sort of capitalize it? Or how did you come to see DeFi as something that is important to Oasis?
I think we started talking about DeFi, I'd say a year and a half ago, maybe a year ago. At that time, we really took a first principle approach where we sat down and said, we need to talk to at least 50 people who are working in some level of DeFi or an infrastructure that enables DeFi. And we need to ask them this question. We need to ask like very open question, which is why are you working on DeFi? Who are you trying to be? And why you think DeFi is going to be big? And most importantly, tell us what are your top 3 needs for DeFi if you need to build an application that you invest your energy on in the next couple of years. And we talked, I think, to like 72 people back in time. And here I list DeFi projects that are famous now, DeFi projects that didn't really take off, or infrastructure providers that are enabling DeFi and many other applications, custody, wallets, KYC, and a lot of other infrastructure aspects. And this number one concern was, again, attracting liquidity and creating usage and making sure that users could actually do something with their tokens. So that was the number one problem that everyone had. But the number 2, right after liquidity and usage, was again privacy. And the ability, and like again, privacy means different things, but a lot of these people were telling us that the financial system is somehow private, right? You don't know you may know if I went to Bank of America, if you wait for me outside of one of the branches and you're very lucky, but you don't really know what I do inside there, right? And for the same exact reason, that should be the same thing in DeFi. Now, the thing that probably no one really thought about a year and a half ago, or like didn't really come up in our conversation, which is something that is happening now, is that having this limited scalability, like limited number of transactions per second right now, plus these high fees, would actually create an incentive for a subset of the DeFi users, a very small subset of the potential DeFi users, that are actually taking advantage of that specific setup that, for instance, Ethereum has, and are creating an entire ecosystem and an entire series of product around those 2 components that, in theory, make the network less valuable and more complicated to scale or to bring to additional users, but in practice are attracting a subset of people and making a lot of noise. And that was the part that probably like no one really thought about. And I think people are like, the paradox is that people are worrying way more about the limitations of other networks now than they were maybe like a year ago, which is reinforcing the story. And I think that's one of the reasons why you hear Oasis talk about DeFi way more now than maybe like 6 months ago.
That makes sense. From a technical perspective, I think that the use of paratimes is going to be new, or sort of at least a new concept for many developers. Are there unique things that they can do related to DeFi, or how would I even just basically use that when I'm considering building an app on Oasis? Yeah.
I can take that. Yeah.
Yep.
So if you think about it, paradigms, as far as paradigms go, these are parallel runtimes, right? I mean, so they have unique capabilities that developers who are running these paradigms or even building these paradigms can provide for their application developers. So the foundation, at least, and the platform remains completely agnostic as to what capabilities a given paradigm is going to bring to the table. So having said that, I mean, going back to the DeFi case, I think a year and a half ago, what we realized was that given that the Oasis network provides confidentiality, so by that I mean confidentiality for transactions end to end, right? Because you not just have confidentiality for data at rest, but also data in motion and also during compute. So this unlocks, fascinating use cases is what we got. Because think of one of the simplest possible things, and that is what happens today, which is such a ubiquitous thing that people do when you're applying for a loan, for instance. A bank is going to be computing like a credit score based on the data that you are contributing, which you ideally own, right? So is there a way by which we can enable an ecosystem where the bank gets its guarantees that the algorithm that's processing your data to come up with a credit score is exactly what they expect? Whereas you, as an individual, still own all of your data, and then you are then giving this data for the specific purpose, and all parties get guarantees. The score goes to the bank with guarantees that the algorithm that computed it is exactly what they wanted. Individual data is never seen by anything other than a piece of code, right? So that's a very powerful concept if you really think about it, because with that, individuals remain in control of their data, and then all parties, there is incentive compatibility, so to speak. And so given that, that's the paradigm, I think that's the motive that can trigger a new class of applications that can be brought to the table given the capabilities of the platform. That's the way we think about it. And when it comes to paradigms, there could be paradigms that provide confidentiality. There could be those that don't provide confidentiality. It doesn't matter at all. So there's no one size fits all. But then it's fully decentralized, and anyone can build whatever capabilities they want using well-defined interfaces. So that's the way we see the architecture enabling a new class of applications that can take advantage of privacy and confidentiality.
Okay, that makes sense. And so I understand a bit more about how these new classes of applications can emerge. Do you imagine that we will see things like automated market makers, a Uniswap-like a system on Oasis? Or do you imagine that somehow you'll just interact with liquidity of the existing Ethereum-based systems? How do you imagine that interplay happening?
Yeah, so I'll give you two answers here. We have already worked to port some of these contracts over our network. We are working to create whatever connection is needed to reduce the level of friction that we ask the users to onboard if they want to interact with our network. So, and again, we decided to put this effort because we talked to we constantly talk to users and projects, and they tell us that we should invest energy in bringing privacy to this market because, again, that's going to be the next wave of elements that is going to brought to DeFi is going to be actually be powered by privacy. So I think there is a fundamental trade-off, which is the second part of the answer, between the current current DeFi and where a lot of people thought that DeFi should go, and thought that DeFi should go. If you remember the narrative, maybe six months to a year ago, one of the biggest promises of DeFi was banking the unbanked, creating this financial system where everyone can access. And if it's not the unbanked, you can still create a system that doesn't rely on money, wealth, or status or geography, but relies on whether you are able to respect a series of rules or not. Right? That was the promise a year ago. And in the current setup, it definitely went to another direction, which is, are you happy to pay $50, $100 in fees to provide liquidity to another pool and get some money back, right? In exchange for that, with some level of risk that you are happy or not happy to onboard. But it's so evident there are so many friction points that those friction points do not make DeFi very appealing for any fintech similar player right now, right? So what is the lesson here that we're learning? That something has to, we need to decide who we are targeting. And despite we can provide a lot of value to Uniswap or products like that, we also think that our biggest success is going to be when fintech and DeFi start converging, And we think that will actually converge through the ability of executing transactions, the ability of executing many transactions, the ability of not spending a lot of money when you execute a transaction, the ability of calculating your credit score in real time, as Vishwa was saying before, the ability of protecting your business interests and relationships with other companies, and so on and so forth. And we really think that that boils down to privacy, confidentiality, developer tooling, and performance of the network.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I've been firing away questions. I'm curious, Lorien, you've been attentively listening. What's sort of top of mind for you as you think about this space?
Yeah, especially as it pertains to DeFi recently, there's been, I think, a resurgence of conversation around governance and the role of tokens from both not just a control, but also a benefit basis. And I'm wondering how you're thinking about sort of the short-term, medium, and long-term with respect to governance and the Rose token, et cetera. I know there's been I don't think I've seen anything on doing any on-chain governance. Has that changed at all from your perspective, sort of, especially with recent events, with Uniswap, et cetera? How are you thinking about governance going forward?
Yeah, I think governance is a very interesting. It's a very interesting topic that keeps surprising everyone, probably, right?
Yep.
Like, again, a year ago, the narrative was governance is really hard to execute. Then the second way was actually like Compound is executing governance, and like it doesn't seem too complicated, right? But it's very exciting, right? Now, the one thing that I kept thinking about when it comes to governance in general, especially if it's fully decentralized, I think the interesting thing that I personally haven't thought about before, and I haven't found anything like in the market before, is that let's say that you have a product at a certain level, right? Like you like let's put ourselves in like we are this product at time 0, which is the day we release this governance tokens. Now, who are the users that are the most invested in that product? Like, I think it's very fair to say that investors and token holders are the number one like category by interest level, let's say, right? They rank very high in interest. So what does that mean? They will take a certain decision that is going to give them most likely like a good financial return in the very short term, right? Now, who says that this community is actually interested in building a product that has long-term value and it's going to go through ups and downs, similar to whatever company you can think of in the traditional world for a second.
Right.
So my sense is that iteration after iteration, that's going to become like that governance is going to create a set of users that amplifies the view of early stakeholders who in the current market tend to have a very high financial incentive over a product incentive, and I think that creates a disconnection between the long-term value of a product and the actual financial incentive of a product. Now, I think someone is going to be able to solve that, but I think when you look at traditional companies and had they like if they were really focused on like short-term financial return, I'm not sure they would have been able to like succeed in the market. And I do see this as a fundamental trade-off of the current governance. So possibly my argument leans towards thinking that fully decentralized governance for protocols that have a strong financial incentive behind is very risky. It doesn't set the basis for a successful product that reaches mass adoption. While I would argue that bringing some incentives and some governance a little bit closer to the application layer, so closer to the user, I think creates a much better setup for a successful long-term product that has a long-term value. And I think this is how we came up with this vision of this responsible data economy that creates this better cooperation between the entities of a certain network, the participants of a certain network.
Right. So maybe wait for a bit until the network's more decentralized or there's more applications that have a vested long-term interest, and then evaluate what on-chain options may exist at some point once there's wide utilization past the initial financial investors.
Yeah, I mean, don't take me wrong. Like, we are launching, we're planning to launch it with a network that is decentralized, and we are not necessarily planning on like waiting long to do that. But then when the governance that we have seen has been working on this like weird layer that for some people is application layer, for some people is protocol layer, right? You can argue that compound, like the eternal question is it a protocol or is it an application? And you never find a solution to that answer, but the question is, applications that are built on top of compound, when they attract their users, those users, are they going to be invested in voting for the bottom protocol layer that powers that certain application or not?
Right.
Like, so I see a disconnection there. So I think that is, when we say governance, I think it's extremely important to understand what kind of governance we're talking about. What are we voting for? What kind of rules do we expect to be put out there? Like, what kind of like questions or proposed rules? And so I think that part needs to be figured out, not to be confused with the idea that the network should be decentralized, and we think the network should be decentralized, and that's what we're working towards.
Right. Okay. Great, that makes sense.
And one thing, if I may add, I mean, it could be more. I mean, all of these things are interrelated, right? I mean, the changes that happen at one layer, of course, have ramifications at layers that are above. So I think it's more of a matter of, I was also figuring out, like what Luca was saying, I mean, how this exactly impacts all the different stakeholders. So instead of actually worrying about the stakeholders, so to speak, it's more of how this is going to help the network in the long run, how it's going to enable new kinds of applications. I think remaining focused on that, then you pretty much are going to be opening up the doors to a diversity of investors, because then they see the value that you're bringing to the table, not just through decentralization, but also in terms of the sheer diversity of applications that you're enabling on the platform. Right?
Got it. That makes sense. Cool. Thank you for that. So moving up one level, there's a number of either second layer or first layer other approaches to privacy. I'm wondering if you could just sort of, without, there's projects, I don't want to get into a sort of a bad or good approach necessarily, but, there's stuff like, there's mixers, there's NewCipher, there's a couple of other approaches to privacy. Sort of how do you see, for people who are just thinking about privacy generally and at a high level, how do you see yourself fitting into that ecosystem? Overall, I think privacy is probably one of the best use cases as defined for blockchains in general. And I'm personally very happy to see a bunch of people taking this as a sort of a prime value proposition. But I'm just sort of wondering how you sort of see the overall market and product releases around privacy and blockchain right now. So, and maybe some of those other projects, or do they fit together? Is it a layered stacked approach? Are they directly competitive? Sort of how do you see that market?
Yeah, from a technical perspective, at least, I think that there's oftentimes conflation between privacy and confidentiality. So the way we think about this is, privacy is, of course, an application-level construct, if you really think about it. But then confidentiality is something that the platform should build in from the ground up. So for Oasis, at least from the very outset, the focus has been privacy first. By that, what we mean is, if you think about it, you need integrity at the bottom of the call, right? But going up the totem pole, you need confidentiality, and so that you can also maintain those integrity guarantees. And once you provide integrity and confidentiality, then going one level up at the application layer, you also need privacy. So that is the way in which we look at the whole thing. And for us, from the very beginning, we've built our network so that we can have these confidentiality guarantees for transactions end to end. And that, in fact, unlocks privacy, right? So which means that you can provide, for instance, you can have an application that lets you federated learning, for instance, right? I mean, so that itself is a privacy modality, if you think about it.
Right.
Where the compute actually, at least part of the compute goes to the data. Of course, that's not sufficient. There are other things that you need on top of it, like differential privacy and so on and so forth. But we don't have to get into those level of details. But then all that I'm saying is that it's an application level thing that builds on top of integrity and confidentiality that should really be a platform capability. So that is the way I think about it. From a technical perspective, at least, I mean, I think all of these things go hand in hand. One influences the other. And then for privacy, you need confidentiality. The confidentiality, you also need integrity. So,
yeah, I like that distinction. It's helpful to think about it that way. So that's great.
Okay, I was looking at some of the questions that we've got coming in from other folks, and some people are interested to hear more about how user tokens or tokens that are not rows will interplay here. And maybe this is sort of a one-on-one question, but will users be able to create their own tokens? Can they do things with them in permissionless way? So maybe start there and we can build up, just take that sort of base level question.
Luca?
Yeah. Okay. So I can answer this a little bit more on the interoperability between like different projects. Perhaps like Vishwa can take the second part of the question that was like creating tokens on top of our network. I think. So for what concerns DeFi, or I mean, we with an angle of like keeping in mind the DeFi user more than just for DeFi, because at the end of the day, like the solution applies to every type of vertical. But we clearly want to make it super easy for our network to talk to other networks. Again, like working on a consensus layer that is like interoperable and is based on Tendermint is already an indication of the way we think about this. But even when we consider like the actual assets and the ability for these assets to flow from one place to another one, we're definitely investing some resources on building bridges between our network and where liquidity is, which right now is clearly Ethereum. So we haven't announced that yet, and I like not to do it here. But one of the things that we are actually doing is building a solution that allows users to lock certain assets in a certain place and replicate the similar asset on our network, and vice versa, of course. And that will come with a significant advantage of not exposing these people to the volatility of one of the two tokens or both of them, which we think is not something that users or developers should really pay for, because that's not in the nature of what they're trying to do. Again, I think one of the most important things that our network is trying to bring to the market is this alignment between what the core users should be able to do and what they will be able to do on our network. We will announce that soon, so it's not going to take us long to do it. We are exploring different solutions, of course. We are also looking at what the market is doing. We appreciate someone decided to have a little bit more of a decentralized approach. Someone else is having a more centralized approach. Frankly speaking, we don't think the solution should be. We really think the solution will come up with has to have the highest level of security, not the highest level of decentralization. If these two work on an opposite direction, we are still exploring 2 or 3 solutions on whether it should be like fully decentralized or partially decentralized, or perhaps relying on different entities. Do not forget that the Oasis network through the Oasis Labs is also focused on enterprises. So we have to keep that perspective in mind as well. And it's not really easy to go to enterprises and say, hey, like, you want to run centralized computation in a privacy-preserving way, buy Rose tokens. That's extremely, like, there are enterprises that want to do that. There are enterprises that don't want to do that. So we need to serve those people. And to serve those people, we think that something around a stable digital version of our token, or a stable digital entity of the dollar on our network, can actually help them allocate some budget. And by default, either we come up with our solution from scratch, but like why at this stage, or we leverage existing solutions and we bring them over. And with that respect, we also think that working a little, like bridging something between decentralized and decentralized works may actually work best for the next period, for the 2 targets that we need to serve, that are the crypto developers, crypto people, crypto focused, crypto enthusiasts, and the enterprise developers, who will that may take a little longer, but there's no doubt that will actually like make a difference in the blockchain space and in the DeFi space.
Yeah, interesting. I hadn't really considered or recalled that you had this sort of enterprise focus, or at least that's part of it, what Oasis Labs is after. Do you see an overlap between sort of what larger established enterprises are doing and DeFi, or do you think those are mostly mutually exclusive, or do you think they're sort of coming together?
In my yeah, go ahead, Luca.
No, you go, Vishwa. I'll think about it.
Yeah, so I was going to say that in my mind, at least, it's just waiting to happen. Fintech and healthcare are two sectors that are very slow to move. So I would expect that, in some cases, it's going to be almost like, I mean, as you see a lot more momentum building towards DeFi applications, for instance, we do expect that there will be large fintech institutions that would want to participate in something like this. But you're right, that there is that enterprise focus for enterprises, like what Luca was mentioning earlier. It's not necessarily always the case that they would want a decentralized network. So there is some level of centralization that they might prefer, but then the way we think about it is not being prescriptive, but instead ensuring that people are capable of building whatever they would like. If they want to have a centralized runtime, but then they want to participate in the decentralized network for select transactions or for storing select information for logging or for audit purposes, then that is something that they're free to do. And then it's more of not really being exclusive, but instead being very inclusive and trying to just take it organically. I mean, for many of these things, I think it's going to be more of a matter of showing value and then expecting that there to be an organic growth when large companies then begin to see the value that they bring to the table and then begin to start building applications. So I think it's a mix of all, is what I would say. I mean, it's not like one fit fits all.
The framework that I try to use for like thinking about it is, shall we think of blockchain and DeFi, or like blockchain in general, or something for few, for thousands, for millions, for billions? Like what is the reach of this entire industry? I think the second you cross some numbers, whether it's like thousands to million, probably, I think it's kind of weird to think of a system that will not involve enterprises somehow. And either it's like enterprises that are the blockchain, or it's blockchain that forms some enterprises in a centralized world, or like, I mean, there's gonna be some mix of the two, like, definitely. But the fact that we're able to work with enterprises today is already an indication that like someone is looking at this space. And probably like 2017 was, every company was announcing something about blockchain. Then every company realized that blockchain might take a little longer than what they thought. And so, like, as always, like, the hype went down. But doesn't mean that if the hype goes down, the number of projects that are executed also goes down. There's no correlation between the two. Often it's actually the opposite. Like, let me say this out loud and very clearly. One of the biggest challenges that we are having is that we are doing much more on the enterprise side than what we can actually communicate outside.
Sure.
Which I would say is a pretty big inversion of trend from what it was 2017, which was very few projects, a lot of hype. Now there's like little hype or like no hype, and many more projects that enterprises are looking at. And we also are seeing this transition from building a project within the innovation center of a certain company to like switching to the main teams, right? Switching to the core products or to the core teams. Maybe slowly, or like slower than what every blockchain enthusiast would like, but faster than the expectation that someone made like a year ago. So I think there's no doubt that the two worlds are gonna go together at some point.
Okay, thanks for sharing that. I kind of want to. I got pinged with another question, kind of relating to interoperability as it relates to tokens. And so, what I heard was that right now you guys have a bit of a focus. You're investigating different sort of bridges or strategies of bringing other tokens on, as opposed to maybe creating new native tokens in Oasis. So that makes sense. And you mentioned Tendermint. Do you think that you'll adopt something like IBC, or will it be more like a custom bridge, or would you adopt something? There's a new project called Peggy in the sort of Cosmos ecosystem. Are you looking at these things? Are you thinking about these things? How are you approaching it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we are thinking about these things constantly. And so we're looking at how the world is evolving. And so IBC is something that's been on top of mind. So we are now, of course, focused on the mainnet. We want to make sure that this happens, and then
Right.
once this step is taken, I think it's going to really open up a lot of other interesting things that we can be looking at, which we will bring to the table. Yeah. So including IDC. Yeah.
Okay.
And I also think on this note, like one of the, let's call them guiding principles that we have. I mean, every company has some like set of beliefs that may change, but guide the decisions, is that there are aspects where being first really matters a lot. And there are other aspects where being first doesn't necessarily make a big difference, let's say. This may be like my personal view more than a company view at this stage, but being first on the bridge and like investing a lot of energy while everyone else is trying to do like similar things in different ways, given the nature of a bridge, which is like something that connects multiple networks, like we don't feel a big pressure in like bringing innovation on that specific bridge, but we think the bridge will actually follow what the market adopts. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and we remain completely agnostic, really, if you think about it, right? So
right.
We are prepared to pretty much adopt any technology that is out there that is showing promise. So it's like, yeah, and we don't want to be prescriptive, also.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. In terms of you mentioned liquidity a few times. Is it important for you to sort of drive liquidity within Oasis, and are there specific plans to do that, or are you thinking about it differently? Is it more about how can we sort of add special security or privacy features to existing tokens, or just how are you approaching that sort of playing with other tokens that are out there?
So one interesting answer that I want to give here is that one trend that we notice is that the excess of confidence hasn't necessarily produced good outcomes for some projects. And I think we've been really cautious of the fact that not having super clear answers to some of these high-level questions or high-level topics more than high-level questions, right? High-level topics may actually be the strategy to adopt here. The reference that I'm making is that like Compound, super great product, and they brought a lot of innovation, and then like has experienced a curve, and now everyone is talking about something else, and then tomorrow everyone will talk about something else. So we think our network wants to be like a strong backbone, but doesn't want to be necessarily like one level above that and be hyped for 2 months and then like be forgotten. We were trying to create the opposite. So when we think of liquidity, we think that we need to be where liquidity is, which is like again Ethereum. But and we are trying to actually we will not even trying, we will come up or launch a couple of initiatives really soon, and say in the next weeks, not even months, that incentivize liquidity and rewards people for providing some liquidity in order to like to distribute our tokens and to create an even stronger community that takes actions to get access to our Rose token, which so far we acknowledge has been really like close to few people who invested early on. So the answer is that we will do that, and we will boost up our liquidity, and we will do whatever other companies are doing, whatever the market is doing right now. At the same time, I think we want to proceed by experiments, and we want to proceed by quick and very specific actions that give us enough knowledge and put us always on the top of the wave, like so that we can have a 360 view of what's going on around us. But we don't want to be necessarily like jumping into the next thing. So I think our best user base for people who are willing to submit liquidity or work with us in some capacity are actually people who believe in the project, see what we're doing, see the value of what we're bringing, decide to invest some energy in working with us or in being rewarded by one of our activities. I don't see Oasis as being extremely focused on only one thing for 3 months of time. Does that answer the question, or?
Yep. That makes sense. And then the last thing I'll talk about tokens is specifically about the Rose token. Do you imagine that will be focused, staying focused as a staking token, or do you imagine it will also participate somehow in DeFi on Oasis?
I think it will be definitely like both of them. Like the staking will be extremely important, and the incentivizing liquidity. Again, like the definition of staking is broadening every day as we speak.
Yeah, sure.
But if we mean like staking as a like consensus and all these things, yeah, that's definitely going to be expanding into DeFi. And we are finding the best way and working with the best partners, I'd say, to do two things. One is like boost up liquidity and providing the incentives that are required to do so. That's one. And the second one is we're working with, this is what I said at the beginning, we're working with companies, we're chatting to companies, we're working with companies, and we are at a more formal and informal level to understand how Oasis can become really important to enable the next generation of what they want to do. On the flip side, a lot of these protocols that are very popular now, I won't make names, but a lot of protocols that are listed are mentioned like 15 times per day on every newspaper these days. They're trying to see, they are themselves looking for ways to work with many more projects, networks later on. So there is a very mutual, there is a very mutual connection of objectives, or like sharing of objectives, that is bringing us closer day after day. So I think the Rose token will be extremely valuable for this next generation of privacy first applications that have some properties of enabling like privacy and keeping the data private in order to achieve a lot of the things that we talked about before and we'll possibly talk about later.
Okay. I have a bit of a self-serving question. As you know, Figment is a validator, and we plan to operate on Oasis. We're excited about it. It seems like there's an opportunity for us to do more than just sort of run a server and participate in consensus. How would you, do you imagine that you see someone like a validator like Figment doing more than one thing in Oasis? Do you imagine there's going to be multiple parties? How do you sort of see those groups coming together?
In fact, one of the things that I found to answer the question was on your website, you also mentioned opacity around various things like, So I was thinking that given the capabilities that the platform has, providing confidentiality and so on, so is there a way by which we can address some of the problems that you see right now, right? So that you can bring applications that have confidentiality, people can share more data, and as a consequence, they can glean better insights. So I can see that there are a lot more things. I mean, just glancing over what you have on your website, I can see that there are a lot more interesting things that we can work on using the underlying technology. So that is my first thought.
Yep. Okay, that makes sense. And then while we're sort of on this topic, do you guys have any sort of requests you want to see people build on Oasis, whether DeFi or not? Are there sort of missing pieces you're hoping that the community kind of jumps in and helps with or brings over? Are there things that you've sort of had in mind that you think would be a really good fit?
Yeah, go ahead, Luca.
Yeah, I mean, we have a very interesting partnership to like every day take what's in DeFi on Ethereum and bring it over to Oasis. And I think that has been extremely helpful because of two things. Like, again, porting a contract on the Oasis network is very easy. But what's even more interesting is the quality of the relationship that we have built like silently over the last year or so, and the investors that we have, and like thanks to the investors that we have, thanks to the professionals that we have, thanks to the employees that we have, and thanks to the advisors that we have. And I think like the ability of talking to these people and understanding what are the 1, 2, 3 points where privacy will make a difference. I think this has been an invaluable source of feedback. Hence, we're very excited to work with these players that are bridging Ethereum and Oasis every day more and more. Not just the two chains, but the actual applications on top. So like Uniswap was an example of what I said before. I think the other set of, I mean, clearly like all the infrastructure providers are increasingly wanting to work with us as we approach mainnet launch. So that's another example of what we wish to see even more. But I do think like my personal preference goes for the next generation of fintech. Like if I see a fintech application coming closer to our network and embedding some of the privacy principles that we propose, not necessarily to comply with regulation and with data management around the world, but to create data-related incentives at an application level. I think that is what I would love to find in the next future. We have two examples and two signs that make us believe that this is going to happen. We actually have two companies through the Dev Accelerator program that we have that are sort of one I'm very passionate about is reinventing the mortgage market, applying privacy to the mortgage market, and the number of activities and number of opportunities that are generated by securing the data, tokenizing the data, and making this data available to third parties only if the user wants, and not by default, is creating like a secondary market that is controlled by the user. And that has been amazing so far, because you can really see how this very weird entity called data that is so very important for someone, but not that important for someone else in the same equation, like company on one side and user on the other side. We're actually seeing this becoming an asset that is traded and is priced and is controlled and is invested and generates some level of return for the actual owner, incentivizing the actual user to switch over that application over another application that does the same thing because of an increased level of alignment of incentives. And I think if we find other series of applications in the fintech world that say, we want to embed privacy in what we do because privacy is going to allow us to attract more users because users have an incentive to do that, I think that is what would make me even more passionate about what we're doing.
Great. And I think we're close to time, but I just wanted to ask one question. So first of all, congratulations ahead of time of the actual mainnet launch. I know it's a massive lift to get there. So I kind of hate asking you this question. Once you've done that, what's your next big milestone or thing that's going to be keeping you up to date? Like once you've gone to mainnet, what are you instantly going to turn your attention to and focus on, and what's the next big hurdle or milestone for you guys?
Yeah, I think for us, data tokenization, like what Luca was mentioning earlier, so ensuring that we can have applications that enable individuals to take control and ownership of their data and participate, with their tokens in a data market would be something. Data tokens in a market would be something that we would love.
Right.
Beyond that, it's more of expanding on paradigms, expanding on capabilities. I mean, trying to see how best we can have, because the architecture really enables you to have a lot of flexibility in the types of runtimes that participate in the consensus layer through these paradigms. And so we are hoping that we can really enable different paradigms. For instance, there could very well be one that's machine learning specific, or there is something that is DeFi specific, like what Luca was mentioning earlier. There could be certain privacy confidentiality features that are built into that paradigm, right? And it's purpose built for DeFi. And so Figment could also be one of those partners that could enable, that could run the paradigm for us, which is confidential, right?
Right.
And so there are a lot of such interesting things that we see happening going forward. Paradigm development is certainly going to be one of those things that we expect to focus on, and making it easy for people to build paradigms. So all of that would be the first set of things that we do after mainnet launch. Anything else, Luca, that you would want to?
Yeah, no, I think there is this perception that mainnet launch is a one-off event.
Yep.
Clearly, there are like custom upgrades and improvements and just like following the industry. So I personally don't even see it as there's mainnet one day and the day after we launch mainnet and we're done. Like it's a process, right?
Then the work starts.
Then the work starts to some extent. You're right. There's going to be like even more pressure, more feedback, more insights. I think that's the exciting part, is that we'll be live, right? We'll be working with the community and not just for the community in silence. So that part is actually interesting. I also think like the actual like effort on top of what Vishwa said and on top of the technical things will also be on like, okay, now the network is live, like what applications are we gonna see on top of this network, and what do they need, right? Like AWS, all these cloud systems, they launched these systems, but then they have to build a lot of things to make it consumable, to make it usable. And it's gonna be exciting like this possibility of getting feedback and custom feedback, I think is going to be like probably the most exciting thing. On a more practical note, I would say that once this mainnet is live, like we also can complete the very last mile of a lot of the integrations that we built. Like the bridge is one, the stable coin, the other the digital representation of existing assets on other chains on our chain, the implementation of some of the protocols that require liquidity. Like a lot of these things will actually go live and need to be completed one last mile. And I think that will be extremely exciting as well.
Right. That makes sense.
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, look forward to being part of it and driving it forward. So look forward to the ride.
So there was a question about from Mark Berg in the chat on the right. It says liquidity mining launch or IEO. I assume we were not going to talk at all about any sort of token sales or anything offering today like that. But just should we have people look at your blog or any official communications as we get closer to launch to participate?
Yeah. Like our blog is always a great source of information. We are definitely going to do. We're definitely going to launch activities that are going to be very well suited to not to expose our users to the level of risk that we're seeing in some of the protocols in the industry, in the DeFi industry, and still are going to give good incentives for people to participate. And I think that is like the level of security, safety, privacy, and responsibility have been the keywords of our work, and I think they're going to be like they will keep existing in our activities. So for sure, please look at our blog. We're very active on Telegram, and we've been really active recently. So feel free to join the channel. We're all there. Happy to answer more questions there if there's no time today. But yeah, we are launching activities, probably more on the like liquidity mining idea than IEO or token sale. But yeah, there's a lot that will be announced.
Yeah. And please don't hesitate to ask us questions, folks. I mean, get on Telegram and ask us anything pretty much. We're always there to answer. Yeah. We would love to demystify anything whatsoever about the network. So.
Great. Well, we covered a lot of stuff today. Everything from sort of the unique things that Oasis can do for DeFi, interoperability, pegging, liquidity, all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot going on here. And it seems like the best place to keep up to date is with your Telegram channel, which you just put the link in there. Like I said, as a validator, we've been following along with testnets. We've launched our Block Explorer Hubble. We're going to offer a tool for developers called Data Hub. So you don't have to run your own full node. We will run full nodes as a service for Oasis. So developers who want to get started have even less to do. That'll be exciting. Or if you want to, use it for your wallet, you can use it as the URL for your wallet, RPC for your wallet too. So we're excited. It seems like clearly in the chat, people keep asking about how they can get involved. Look forward in the Telegram for that. Vishwa or Luca, is there anything you guys want to sort of leave as sort of parting ideas or people to take away with?
And Figment has been a fantastic partner. Thank you so much for everything that you continue to do for us and what you've done for us in the past.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely echo that. You guys have been great partners and great source of feedback again. Like we really believe in that. On top of that, like one thing we always say is that this is a collective effort, and whatever source of feedback is very welcome at Oasis. We definitely released probably less than 50% of what we actually been working on over the last year. So definitely stay in touch and definitely stay connected to our channels, because there's going to be a lot of releases and a lot of information over the next few weeks.
Very good. All right. Well, thanks for your time. I learned a lot today, and look forward to getting this video out so more people can see it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
For the opportunity. Yeah.
Have a great day.
See ya. Bye.